Okay. Here we go. Volume 6. And after this, we have, I think the newest volume. I think. Yeah. Yeah. Next volume is the newest one. Yeah. I was like, what? I was trying to remember. Prologue. Well, the Archduke Conference is finally over. How are you holding up, Florencia? Florencia looked down at her belly. It was now a little noticeable, no matter how carefully she dressed to hide it. The truth was that she wanted to rest, but there were too many decisions to be made before they returned to Ehrenfest. I am fine for now, she said. We have much to discuss, do we not? I will visit your chambers once I am changed. This year's Archduke Conference had involved one shocking development after another. A divine instrument had turned into the night sky during the Starmine ceremony. The nobles of other duchies had banded together to get Rosemine sent to the Sovereign Temple. Rosemine had discovered that she was a Zent candidate, which had resulted in several meetings with the royal family. Then everyone had participated in a second dedication ritual and restored their respective duchies' gathering spots. Never before had any of these things happened during a conference, so there was plenty that needed to be worked out before the Archducal couple could return home. I never thought Wilfrid's and Rosemine's engagement would be cancelled like this. Once the news spread that Wilfrid was no longer going to marry Rosemine, he would cease to be secure in his position as the next Ob Ehrenfest. Would he be overjoyed to hear this, given his own recent pushes to end their engagement? And then there was Charlotte, who had been forced out of the Archducal candidacy as a result of the betrothal. How would she react after having shed so many tears? Would she rejoice that the path once lost to her could now be forged anew, or would she sob for her brother by blood, who would now need to endure the same merciless pain? Florencio could not tell. Melkor was currently being educated to play an assisting role within the Archducal family, a necessary course of action, at least being for recent developments. To ensure that he would not oppose Wilfrid, he was young enough that it might have been possible to train him as the next Archduke, but it had already been decided that he would serve as the next High Bishop. Florencio worried that, like Rosemine, he would end up lacking critical socializing skills or common sense as a noble. But I am most worried about Wilfrid. Being the eldest son of an Archducal family was a dangerous position, and this was especially true for Wilfrid. He had already enjoyed a long stretch as the duchy's next Archduke, and achieved grades impressive enough for him to have been recognized as an honor student at the Royal Academy. He was also trusting to a fault, which made it easy for others to sway him. He had already been led astray once, and if such a thing happened again, there was a genuine risk that it would end with his assassination. If not that, perhaps he would join Veronica in the Ivory Tower, reduced to nothing more than a source of mana. At best, and most likely at all, he would merely be removed from the Archducal family. We finally managed to remove Oswald from his position, and yet the engagement between Wilfrid and Rosamund had emboldened the former head attendant. Believing that his lord was now guaranteed to become the next Archduke, he had shamelessly used Veronica's methods to further his own interests. Florencia had opposed the man's distasteful conduct, but removing him had not been her call to make. It was up to Wilfrid to decide whether he would take action. But no matter how much his mother had tried to convince him to change his retainers, he had refused. In his words, he had seen no reason to abandon those who had stayed with and supported him when he was at risk of being disinherited. Only through the purge had the Archducal couple finally secured enough leverage to force Oswald from his role. But their own retinues had suffered as well. So dire was their situation that they were having to share retainers between themselves, leaving them without any manpower to spare for their son. Florencia had planned to give him one of her retainers after the Archduke conference when they had hoped to be in a more favorable position, but then his engagement had been abruptly cancelled. Truly, what is there to do? To make matters worse, during the conference it had come to light through one of his guard knights that Wilfrid was still secretly in contact with Oswald. Bartold, a name-sworn retainer of his young lord, was serving as their intermediary. One problem after another. The timing is so unfortunate that I could almost resent the gods. It was problematic for Wilfrid, a member of the Archducal family, to remain so close with a former retainer. It suggested that he knew not why Oswald was relieved of duty to begin with, and their continued relationship was very likely to develop into an unnecessary incident. He will need to be educated on how to deal with his retainers and maintain an appropriate distance from them. I shall consult Lebrecht. Should you now be resting, Lady Florencia? I appreciate your concern, but I must settle various matters with the Ob before we return to Ehrenfest. You all may continue to prepare for our departure. After returning to her room and changing into looser attire, Florencia headed to Sylvester's chambers. They sat patiently as their attendants served them tea. Then they sent their retainers to wait behind screens, and each picked up a sound-blocking magic tool. Keeping the results of the Archduke conference private was the utmost importance. Sheesh, I still can't get over what happened, Sylvester said, moving to join his wife on the couch. His archducal persona had given way to his true emotions, frown and all. Who'd have thought that Rosamund was a Zent candidate and that the king would end up adopting her like this? The Grucheshite was of critical importance to anyone who wished to rule Jurgensmith. Without it, internal borders could not be redrawn, deposed duchies could not be reformed with new foundations, and the country gates could not be opened or closed. That was why the Sovereign Temple refused to accept Trollquoit as the Zent, why those who shared their opinions stirred rebellion, and why tensions had not ceased even 10-some years after the Civil War. Florencia nodded in agreement. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an honor for the royal family to seek an Archduke candidate from Ehrenfest, a Middle Duchy. Still, if our assistance is required to find the Grucheshite, we are duty-bound to provide it. Now that Ehrenfest was being treated as a winner of the country's civil war, Florencia had come to realize just how much the victorious duchies were doing to keep Jurgensmith afloat. Deposed territories had been divided among the greater duchies, who were having to dump raw mana into their lands, a terribly inefficient process made necessary by the missing Grucheshite, which was what required to manage the country's foundations. It would suffice over a short period, but the burden it imposed would only increase. At the same time, there were reports that the portion of old workstock under Arensbach's control was so devoid of mana that it was facing enormous difficulties. She continued, during these tough times when even greater duchies are feeling the strain, one of the royal palace's magic tools crumbled to dust. We can deduce as members of an archducal family that the tool must have been close to a foundation, which explains why the royal family feels so much pressure right now. The royals had admitted this in confidence during their discussion about adopting Rosemine. They had assumed that they would be able to meet the country's mana requirements without the Grucheshite, but as the days passed, their misjudgment was being thrust in their faces. Obtaining it was crucial, otherwise it would only be a matter of time before Jurgensmith faced complete and utter destruction. A decade had passed without anyone finding even a trace of the Grucheshite. That, coupled with the time pressure, explained why the royal family was grasping so desperately at this lone opportunity. If, as they had said, Rosemine truly was the closest Zent candidate to obtaining the Grucheshite, then why would they not have scrambled to adopt her? Florencia believed that the adoption would have been inevitable even if Rosemine had been due to become the next Ehrenfest. However, in our current state, we cannot rejoice, Florencia said. It brings me great shame as both Rosemine's adopted mother and an archducal family member serving royalty that we cannot send her off with a smile. And without needing to make conditions, she took a sip of her tea and sighed. Her home duchy of Frembeltag was also suffering immensely for the lack of a Grucheshite. Most of the rebelling nobles were from the deposed duchies, and they were only daring to act in the first place because without their obs, their medals could not be used to distribute proper punishments. We really don't want Rosemine to leave Ehrenfest right now, Sylvester said. Indeed, were we not in our current predicament, she would not have shown so much resistance and applied so many conditions. Yet she had no choice. Florencia giggled and then added, Prince Sigiswald must have been quite surprised when he attempted to negotiate with her directly. A normal Archduke candidate would have understood the problems that Jurgensmith was facing and determined that assisting the royal family was the greatest priority for both their home and the country at large. They would have intuitively agreed to put aside their own duchy's problems, as securing the Grucheshite would improve things for everyone. Of course, Rosemine was anything but a normal Archduke candidate. She had been raised in the Ehrenfest, a middle duchy that had mostly avoided the chaos of the Civil War, and in its temple no less. Her understanding of the royal family and of the other duchy's suffering was minimal. She prioritized her own duchy above all others and she was reluctant to help freely, even going as far as to negotiate the terms of her adoption. The royal family could not be blamed for their surprise. At the same time, however, Rosemine's efforts had been extremely beneficial to Ehrenfest. If not for her suggestions, Florencia would never have thought to attach conditions to the adoption. I know there's no helping it, Sylvester said, but it hurts my head just trying to imagine the repercussions this is going to have. If only this whole mess had happened last year instead. She could have negotiated to cancel Ferdinand's engagement rather than merely save him from punishment. Indeed, and if not for that engagement, Rosemine would surely have been more compliant with the royal family. Everything would have proceeded a bit more smoothly if only Lord Ferdinand had stayed in Ehrenfest until the Archduke conference, as was initially the plan, and not been summoned to Arensbach so early. Indeed, had his departure for Arensbach not been brought forward to the end of autumn, he would not have been so involved in the duchy's administration, nor would it have been a problem to delay his starbinding. In turn, his lack of an official tie to Detlinde would have meant there was zero threat of him being punished by association, which would have put Rosemine more at ease. Ehrenfest would have been afforded a bit more leeway when dealing with his handovers, and the loose ends of the purge would have been tied up more neatly. Not to mention, it would have delayed all this troublesome business from Wilfrid. No sooner had spring arrived than he had abruptly started to view Rosemine's compassion for Ferdinand as a problem, spurring him to protest and commit acts of defiance. This had always been bound to happen, but if everything had gone according to the original schedule, it wouldn't have been happening now. His engagement to Rosemine could have been cancelled at a more peaceful time, rather than while his relationship with her was so twisted. Why must everything be so difficult, Florencia asked with a sigh. Before she could say anything else, she felt Sylvester's hand tenderly stroke her back. As her body relaxed and the tension she was feeling started to dissipate, she turned to her loving husband and reached out to caress his face. He looked so exhausted. It was becoming harder to find the time for those acts of affection, but that just made them all the more valuable. I already suspected this, but the recent incidents have made me certain, Florencia said. Rosamund's focus truly is too narrow for her to be the king's adopted daughter. You think so? If the country's foundation were to crumble, neither Ehrenfest nor Lord Ferdinand and Arensbach would survive. An archducal family member would seem to be in a position of leadership, must be impartial, and work toward whatever future will produce the fewest casualties. Rosamund is the opposite. She makes her decisions based on emotions and personal preference. Does she not? Wilfried is much the same. In this regard, they are both far too immature for their age. Both had obtained good grades at the Royal Academy, but their fractured education as archducal family members was clear to see. One had been raised by Veronica, while the other had grown up in the temple. It seemed that not one's early education had even greater impact than Florencia had even assumed. Yeah, spending all that time in the temple and then those years in a Jarif hasn't done much for Rosamund's common sense. That's not her fault. One, she's not even from this world to begin with. Two, she was raised mostly as a commoner until she began starting in the temple. And then this whole thing with her being adopted came up. And then the whole Jarif happened. So yeah, she kind of has a very skewed common sense there. I'm assuming Sylvester knows this, obviously. So, he knows why her common sense is so screwed up. Sylvester agreed. She can keep up appearances, but you can just tell that she's fundamentally different from the rest of us. I told she prioritizes the things she wants to do and puts off whatever doesn't interest her. She's always refusing to embroider, despite it being an essential skill for any decent noblewoman. Florencia knew that much because of the reports she had received from her retainers. That said, Sylvester continued, I don't think she's narrow-minded or anything like that. She just has a tendency to focus on the people she cares about. That's why she's more concerned about the commoner she knew from a young age than the well-being of any noble. It's also why she's more concerned about her former guardian, Ferdinand, than her fiancé, Wilfried, and why she's more invested in Ehrenfest's problems than Jürgen Smith's. She'll do everything she can within her sphere of influence that doesn't get involved in anything beyond that. Florencia suspected that he was right. Sylvester knew Rosamund better than she did, and what he had said seemed to add up. Sometimes Rosamund would act quickly enough to leave even adults speechless and exploit even the briefest window of opportunity to their fullest. But on other occasions, her understanding of the world was worse than that of a pre-baptismal child. Her perspective truly was twisted. Duh. Sylvester paused and thought, by the same logic, if we can get her invested in the royal family and the sovereignty after her adoption, she'll probably start caring about Jürgen Smith above all else. We should think about putting something she really values in the sovereignty. As nice as that might be, do you truly believe she would develop such a connection to the sovereignty? On the other hand, her lack of noble common sense has benefited the royal family up until now. No one noble would have managed to unite Eglantine and Anastasius, nor would they have come up with, much less suggested, the idea to gather mana by holding a dedication ritual at the Royal Academy. These feats had only been made possible by Rosamund's peculiar common sense. But on the other, once she moves, her lack of education will surely be seen as a blight. Long have I wished to do something about it, but she is so reluctant to visit the castle that my options are limited. As a mother, Florencia had used dinners, tea parties, and other such occasions to communicate with and educate her children. Rosamund rarely spent time in the castle, though, so she was often absent from such gatherings. She barely socialized with other nobles to begin with, so what would normally have developed naturally had not developed at all. Florencia continued, it might be tempting to assume that the next year will offer us an opportunity to improve the situation, but we can expect to see her in the castle even less often now that she is preparing for her move and the handover. Florencia had previously said that she wished to teach Rosamund about being a first wife, but the idea had quickly been shelved. Rosamund's temple work came first, she was told. There would be plenty of time to focus on her education in the future, and there were far more pressing matters to attend to, but now Florencia was just as busy. Once she gave birth, nursing the baby would be her top priority. Rosamund has been meeting with Elvira in the temple, Florencia mused. No, she's not. She's only done that a couple times. And there is nothing forbidding her from visiting her home. I expect her true mother has been educating her on how to be a noblewoman. Don't you think that's maybe no, she's not? Considering how bad her education for being a noble is? I mean, when it comes to socializing, Hello? Don't you think that should have been a red flag when you noticed how bad she was at it? Be like, Elvira, aren't you teaching her this stuff? And then you could have found out, no, she's not. Which would have been the question, who's been teaching her? Nobody. But I worry about her teachings will not be enough. Archnobles and Archduke family members live in fundamentally different worlds. Sylvester put on a half smile and waved a hand as if to dismiss his wife's concerns. Rosamund will manage on her own. That force of nature has made it this far, after all. She's so determined to realize her desires that she even negotiated with the royal family, and whenever she's faced with a problem that seems impossible, she swiftly solves it without using some incomprehensible approach or whatever. I'm not that worried. Florencia placed a hand on her forehead. You are as optimistic as always, or as negligent, I should say. We don't have time to educate Rosamund. Even if we did, I doubt we'd make much progress with her. It seems pretty obvious that we should instead devote our resources to introductory relations and fixing Ehrenfest's internal problems. I really mean it when I say that the impact of this conference is going to be enormous. Rosamund is no ordinary Archduke candidate. Thinking about all the handover work we'll need to do makes my head hurt. The next year will give us enough time to deal with that. Was that not what Rosamund concluded during her negotiation with the royal family? Rosamund was similarly focused on how her move will impact Ehrenfest. She likely already had a plan for how to pass on her work to others. Melkor is starting to take over in the temple, and Elvira is in charge of the printing industry. She may leave business with the lower city to her retainers, with Brunhilde taking the lead. I would also advise delegating work to Wilfrid, even though his current relationship with Rosamund might complicate things. Not happening. If we involve him, no way will things go smoothly. His retainers have too much bad blood with Rosamund's. I can already see feuds popping up all over the place. He's not wrong about that. Florencia understood that disputes between retainers would inconvenience everyone involved, but still, for the sake of his future, Wilfrid needed to take over at least some of Rosamund's work. At the very least, she said, could we not entrust something to Charlotte? She's on good terms with Rosamund, so I would not expect them to butt heads. Delegating work to Charlotte will make it easier for Wilfrid to get involved later. Nah, we need Charlotte to assist you with your work for at least half a year after your delivery. And given that we only have a year before Rosamund leaves, there won't be enough time. If only we could ask Brunhilde to support me instead. But she's underage and still just your fiancé, Florencia lamented. It would be unfeasible to ask Brunhilde to assist with the work of a first wife, when she had yet to formally become a member of the archducal family. Charlotte, on the other hand, would be able to enter Florencia's chambers even after the birth, meaning she would be able to ask questions if she needed to. But even knowing that, Florencia could not help but worry for her son, who is now in the midst of a rebellious phase. What do you think Wilfrid should do, then? Florencia asked. They had planned to double down on his education after the Archduke Conference, but now that his engagement to Rosamund was no more, his future position was of much greater concern. He will continue to support me. This whole mess is going to increase my workload after all. Do you not think he would protest? His engagement being cancelled means that he is no longer guaranteed to become the next Ob. It is easy to imagine he will start pouting or some such. If pouting is the worst he'll do, then I think that's a good thing. Because there's worse he could do. It had not been long ago that Bonifacius had given up on Wilfrid, who had refused to stop throwing tantrums, and recent reports from Ehrenfest suggest that the young lord's attitude had not improved in the slightest. In fact, he seemed glad that his archducal education was being halted. Florencia frowned and heaved an uneasy sigh. In response, Sylvester pressed a finger against and started to massage her forehead. I won't actually be giving him archduke work, he said. And while he's no longer guaranteed to become the next Ob, that doesn't erase his responsibilities as an archducal family member. Not to mention, he's been asking for his engagement with Rosamund to be cancelled. He won't fight against getting what he wants. He might think he wants that, but once he figures out that that's not going to guarantee... Now he's not going to be guaranteed the next Ob. He's going to be pitching a fit. Sylvester was trying to protect his son's position by having him openly carry out his duties as an archducal family member, but how would the duchy's nobles react? Now that his engagement was no more, Wilfrid would need to bear the shame of a guaranteed archduke, once again reduced to the status of a mere archduke candidate. One needed only to consider the situation surrounding Guy Groschel to see how Ehrenfest would treat such an individual. Uh-oh. Yeah, that's not going to go well. The Lice Kings are not going to be happy about this. They find out Rosamund's leaving? They are going to possibly mutiny or something. Who knows? Who knows what they'll do? Or maybe they'll support it. Who knows? I don't know. This would have been so much simpler if romance had actually bloomed between Wilfrid and Rosamund. Had the two fallen in love, Rosamund might have negotiated for Wilfrid to accompany her to the sovereignty or as her fiancé, or wait until she found and relinquished the Gruchenstein, at which point she could return to Ehrenfest and marry him. Then Florencia would never have needed to worry about her son's future. Instead, Wilfrid was demanding that their engagement be cancelled, even getting into shouting matches with his parents, while Rosamund was emotionally detached from the whole affair. On top of everything else, the royal family wanted to keep Rosamund in their care for the foreseeable future. Not a single person had wanted the engagement to continue. Do you think he can remain an archducal family member while being looked down on by the nobility? Florencia asked. Protecting him is my duty as both his father and the archduke, Sylvester said, then let out a short chuckle and placed a gentle hand on his wife's belly. Right now, all they need to think about is your delivery. Florencia found comfort in her husband's unfaltering confidence, but it also made her extremely worried. She knew his tendency to put on a brave face even when he was severely overexerting himself. Sylvester continued, the Lies Kings will oppose Rosamund's move, but it's an honor to be adopted by the king. That won't be able to keep making a fuss once she's gone in any case. And my engagement to Brunhilde should placate them well enough. It might take us a while, but we'll get everything under control. Yeah, I think that alone should hopefully help, because Brunhilde is a Lies Gang. They'll have a Lies Gang person in the Archducal family. That should be enough for the time being, but the only problem is who is going to be the odd once you guys decide to, retire or whatever. The Purge had dissolved the former Veronica faction, and now that its figurehead, Wilfried, was losing his position due to the council's engagement, Sylvester didn't expect the Lies Gangs to continue causing a stir for much longer. Florencia, however, was much less optimistic. Sylvester's position as the next Ob had never faltered, whereas she, the daughter of a third wife, could easily have been demoted to an archnoble, depending on where she married into. Their perspectives on Archducal family members were entirely different. I sincerely believe we should curb the power of the Lies Gang elders before Rosamund leaves. Something must be done so that Wilfried can remain in the Archducal family even after his engagement has been cancelled. No need to frown like that, Sylvester said. I'm not fully convinced that things will go well either. But if we can keep Rosamund's departure a secret, the Lies Gangs won't be incited to action. As it stood, the only ones who knew about Rosamund's future adoption were Rosamund herself, Ehrenfest Archducal couple, and those among the royal family who had participated in the discussion. Rosamund's retainers and the nobles attending the conference might have been aware that Ehrenfest had received several royal summons, but they certainly wouldn't know why. But they're going to know why once you guys have a meeting back at Ehrenfest. It's going to get around. I see, Florence. Especially if Wilfried's retainers find out. They're going to start spreading that like wildfire. In that case, it would indeed serve us well to hide this revelation until Rosamund must leave. Right now, we do not have the strength to spare for keeping the nobles under control, but when it comes time for Rosamund to move, we should already have given our baby the minimum amount of nursing it will require. I will then be able to move more freely. Yep, we'll commit to a vow of silence for now and tell individual retainers what's happening based on whether they're needed for the handover. Those taking over duties will inevitably learn the truth, especially when Rosamund started packing. And at that point, Florencia realized something. How do we intend to help Rosamund with her preparations? I am unlikely to be able to move after the birth. Rosamund had acted with Ehrenfest's best interest in mind, so Florencia was determined to help her prepare, as both her mother and the Archduke's first wife. But that sense of duty was not enough. She knew from experience how useless she would be after giving birth and while looking after the baby. You won't be expected to help, will you? Sylvester asked, for Rosamund has Elvira her true mother. Leave the preparations to her. It'll afford them greater secrecy than preparing in the castle. And I'm sure Rosamund will feel more comfortable. I'll tell her about this through Cardstead. Elvira was busy enough with the printing industry handover, so she had very little time on her hands already. Still, her love for her daughter was tremendously strong. Florencia knew that much, and Rosamund would surely rather spend time with her true mother than her adoptive one. She still loves you either way. Florencia nodded. Of course, Elvira may be better suited to this work, given her relationship to Rosamund's retainers and the amount of time she has spent at the temple. Like I said, only twice. I will simply let Rosamund know that I am willing to provide as much help as I am able. There was much that she needed to think about, preparing for Rosamund's departure, the impact of the cancelled engagement, Ahrensbach's funeral, her own delivery, renovations in Groschel. Let us do our best together, she murmured, affectionately stroking her belly. Oh boy. Report on the Archduke Conference, 3rd year. Oh god, this is not going to go well. Welcome home, sister. Rosamund, you're back. As soon as I stepped through the teleporter, I was greeted by Charlotte, Bonifacius, and my retainers who had stayed at home. Melchior and Wilfried were present as well. I could see them toward the back of the room. We had returned to Ehrenfest in descending order of status, as always, so they were busy speaking with the Archducal couple. Rosamund, Charlotte, we're going to have an Archducal family meeting tomorrow afternoon, Sylvester said casually upon noticing my arrival. Take care not to be late. His expression betrayed not even the slightest hint that we were to discuss my adoption by the king. Moving to see him acting so much like an archduke, I gave a similarly casual smile and replied, understood. Rest well today so that you arrive on time. After we watched Sylvester depart with Florencia to the main building's living area, it was time for us to retire to our rooms in the northern building. The nobles still at the Royal Academy wouldn't be able to teleport back until we were gone. Rosamund, would this make it safe for me to escort you? Bonifacius asked and put his hand on his hip and offered me his arm to hold. Lenore quickly intervened, looking troubled. Please excuse me, Lord Bonifacius, but should Lady Rosamund's fiancé not escort her? He said that he would allow me this rare opportunity to bond with my dear granddaughter. He turned to Wilfried as seeking his confirmation. I did say that, yes, Lord Bonifacius wouldn't even get the chance to escort Rosamund for feast and the like, so why not give him this? Do you not realize how much danger you're putting her in? Cornelius asked with a grimace. This earned him a heated response from Bonifacius. Cornelius, what are you saying? She won't have anything to fear as long as my hand stays put. Bonifacius' attempts to be affectionate had endangered me countless times already. It made sense that my knights were so on guard, but he was puffing at his chest and refusing to back down. In that case, allow me to confirm that your hand won't move, Cornelius said, approaching him with Angelica. They wore the most severe expressions as they tugged, pushed, and even hung from his arm. Dudes, how big is he? They're being way too cautious. And while they're being so serious, everyone else is trying not to laugh. I don't blame them. Melkor was an exception. He was looking on with envy, but Wilfred, Charlotte, and the others were barely managing to compose themselves. As has been demonstrated, his hand will not budge in the slightest, Cornelius says, sounding defeated after a truly thorough investigation. If you hold on here, he gestured to Bonifacio's wrist, then you shouldn't need to worry about your arm getting tired. I did as instructed, then we started toward my room. Bonifacius was being extra careful to match my pace, which might have made it look like he was escorting me if not for my especially small stature. Anyone who saw us would probably assume that I was hanging from his arm instead of holding on to it. Come forth, Ladenshaft, I await the growth your divine protection shall grant me. Sister, how was your first Archduke conference? Charlotte asked. I was terribly surprised when Lord Bonifacius informed me that you were going to stay not just for the first day Starbind ceremony, but for the dedication ritual at the end as well. I was just as taken aback, I said. The royal family made their request while I was translating documents in the underground archive. The reality was we had forced them to request it, but I didn't mention that to Charlotte. Instead, I told a few innocent stories about what had occurred while I was translating with Hannelore and the royal family. Charlotte and the others told me what I'd missed at home in return. We assisted Lord Bonifacius and performed mana replenishment, Charlotte explained. Then I memorized prayers with Wilfred and Melkor. Yeah, Melkor had to learn the prayer for the baptism ceremony, so we decided to join him, Wilfred added. That's much more effective than practicing alone, right? Wilfred, you're acting surprisingly normal. I'm surprised he didn't explode at her, to be completely honest, with how he's been so rebellious lately. Melkor's retainers had apparently been brought to tears by the amount of work that Hartman was piling on them in the temple. And Charlotte had volunteered to give their younger brother a hand with his prayers. Did it work, I asked? Melkor nodded. I memorized the prayer for the baptism ceremony, and now I can perform mana replenishment without ending up unable to move. After regularly offering his mana in the temple, he had to quickly adjust it to supplying the foundation as well. Nice! As we continued to discuss our everyday affairs, we eventually arrived at the northern building. Grandfather, I said, I thank you ever so much for escorting me. Indeed, until dinner then. He let out a heavy sigh of relief. I could guess that he had spent the entire journey focusing on his hand, then turned on his heel and went off, seemingly exceptionally pleased with himself. Upon returning to my room, I told the adult retainers who had accompanied me to the conference to rest in preparation for tomorrow's meeting. My underage retainers will attend to me in the meantime, which was fine for my knights and the scholars, but Gracia will need to serve as my only attendant. As I pondered what to do, Laisletta stepped forward. Lady Rosamund, I shall remain as well. Gracia will struggle by herself. But Laisletta, I insist, Audley accompanied you to the underground archive during the Archduke conference, whereas I remained inactive in the dormitory. Laisletta had prepared tea, lunch, and the like, so she hadn't been that inactive. Still, I couldn't refuse her generosity and put so much pressure on Gracia. Doing that would make me a terrible lady to them. In that case, please continue to serve me for a little while longer. I shall grant you 2 days of rest after tomorrow. Understood. My adult guards returned to their homes, or the night storm, and my 2 adult scholars went off with Audley, Gracia, and Laisletta started putting away my luggage while Felina Roderick gave me a report on the current state of the temple. I also spent some time reading a few transcriptions. I suppose we can have a full retainer meeting after tomorrow's gathering of the Archducal family. Oh, I'll need to contact Brunhilde as well. Over dinner, I received reports from everyone else who had remained in Ehrenfest. We would discuss the events of the Archduke conference later. It was the afternoon of the Archducal family's meeting. Our retainers, the Knights Order, and the high-ranking scholars would all gather with us as per usual, but there was also going to be a new face in attendance, Melkor, even though he was still too young to enroll with the Royal Academy. I don't know why I was summoned, he said. Must be an announcement that everyone needs to hear, no matter their age, Wilfred ventured. Rosamund, you know what this is about, don't you? I did, but I sure wasn't going to be the one to tell them that the king was adopting me, and that Melkor only had 1 year before he needed to take over as the High Bishop. I merely smiled and said, all will be explained soon. Melkor nervously went to the meeting with his siblings on his either side, then took the seat marked for him. Each member of the Archducal family was allowed to bring only 1 retainer of each kind, so I chose Audley as my attendant, Hartman as my scholar, and Cornelius as my guard knight. The attendants and scholars would traditionally rush around to prepare the meeting before the Archducal couple entered. Looks like everyone's here, Sylvester said. In that case, our report on the Archduke conference shall now begin. Like last year, this is going to be a long one. There were a lot of major changes we'll need to cover. Take care not to miss anything. As always, the meeting began with an announcement of the duchy rankings. Sylvester said that the request we had made of Anastasis during the introductory tournament had now been approved. In return for our rank remaining the same, we would start being treated as a victorious duchy. Ah, well now. The quiet relief murmurs from the adults went to show just how much they had struggled to keep up with our new position in the country. However, Sylvester continued, our new treatment brings with it a new burden. Of the greater duchies, you are all aware that Klassenberg is managing old Zanzigas, while Ahrensbach and Dunkelfelker are managing old Workstock, correct? Trawanko is too far from any of the losing duchies, so it instead sent a wealth of archnobles to support the sovereignty. This has put them in a unique situation where they have a large archducal family that can't be moved to the sovereignty, but not nearly as many archnobles as usual. Hochschlitz and Glissenmeyer had grown in power through their marriages with the royal family and were now bearing enormous burdens to return the favor. Now that Ehrenfest was transitioning from a neutral duchy to a winning one, we would need to provide our assistance as well. And what might that new burden be? One of the nobles asked nervously. Sylvester looked across at his audience. Then, once his eyes fell on me, he said, I will announce it next year. But we also stand to gain from this arrangement. To quickly increase our noble population, the royal family has agreed that, for the next 5 years, anyone who marries an Ehrenfest noble must marry into our duchy. On top of that, we will receive 40 magic tools for our newborns. Such are the counterbalances for the new burden we must carry. Ah, so he's going to present my adoption as Ehrenfest's burden. Great. The nobles began to fret. How great must the burden be for the duchy to have received such grand rewards? Still, Sylvester continued with his announcements. He revealed that Ferdinand's starbinding had been delayed, that a dedication ritual had been performed during the Archduke Conference, and that adults could now repeat the ritual for obtaining divine protections. All events related to divine ceremonies. He also mentioned that several members of the royal family had whirled and managed to trigger the same magic circle as Detlinde, meaning she was no longer the only known Zent candidate. From there, Sylvester went through the changes that would start being implemented during the Royal Academy's next academic year. This included the revision to where students would acquire their staffs, thus alterations made to the lesson plan, and the decision that Ehrenfest and Klassenberg would start holding annual dedication rituals as joint research. Staffs will once again be obtained during one's third year, one noble asked. Does this mean the noble population has recovered enough to afford us more leeway? As it turns out, mana compression and divine protections change the quality of one's staff, Sylvester explained. As a result of our joint research with Dunkelfelder, more and more students will obtain multiple divine protections. Adults will too due to performing the dedication ritual at the Archduke Conference. Staffs can only be obtained once. We would want them to be at the highest possible quality. The nobles expressed their understanding, so in short, changes to the Royal Academy's curriculum will become effective next year, Sylvester continued. Then he turned to me and said, will sweeping changes need to be made to the playroom in turn? The playroom primarily covered written lessons, so I doubted it. Practical lessons are far more relevant to staffs, therefore I don't expect the Royal Academy's written lessons to be changed much at all. I believe we will simply need to consult Professor Moritz on what the lesson plan was when staffs were obtained during one's third year. I see, Sylvester replied, nodding. And should we not consider the fact that our educational toys and picture book Bibles will raise most duchies' average grades in a few years' time? Good point. We announced that we would start selling them at the same time that we gave some to the royal family. I think they received a lot of attention. Tell the planting company to prepare them in large numbers. Printing is often done as winter handiwork, so I do not expect many more books to be made between now and summer. It would make more sense to order their mass production during the winter. In preparation for when Groschel is ready and we can trade with more duchies. I had already informed Benno that our picture book Bibles were going to be sold countrywide. In response, he had told me that they were planning to implement some form of mass production. Still, there was little we could do to create more books before the summer when the merchants were due to arrive. I told the other duchies that we would offer more trade spaces next year, so we need to make good on that. But how far along was Groschel with its preparations? I would need to ask when reporting the results of this meeting. Ab Ahrensbach's funeral is being held at the start of summer, Sylvester said, and given Florencia's situation, I will need to go alone. Be ready for that. He had made it clear that Georgine's obsession with Ehrenfest aside, he was politically obligated to attend the funeral of a neighboring Ab. He would also need to confirm that Ferdinand had received a hidden room as promised. I wish I could check on as well, but I was going to be positively flooded with handover and preparation work, and 2 of my knights couldn't be anywhere near Georgine. Plus, even if there hadn't been any issues, I didn't have the stamina for such a long trip in the first place. I definitely wouldn't receive permission to go to Ahrensbach. Next, Sylvester made a few more announcements. The king had refused to host the Lanzana Princess, the Trug-Addle Knights had been expelled from the Sovereign Order, and the interest in religious ceremonies was on the rise after everyone had experienced one for themselves. That is all, Sylvester eventually concluded. Now clear the room. Only members of the Archducal family are permitted to hear what I wish to say next. Even our retainers must leave. This was unprecedented. Not once had a post-meeting discussion required even our own retainers to step outside. Ehrenfest, what is going on? Some expressed their shock, but Sylvester merely waited in silence for everyone to leave. Lady Rose, my retainer said. The Ob has spoken, I replied. Hartmut, Cornelius, you both must leave as well. I ordered my entourage to go, then heaved and drawn outside. The higher-ups and retainers took their leave, watching us all the while, as if attempting to glean what was going on. Once they were gone, a heavy atmosphere overtook the room. Everyone was tense, except for the Archducal couple and me, of course. Okay, I'm going to continue. The cancelled engagement and a choice for the future. Everyone come closer, Sylvester said. Then once we were all grouped together, he activated the sound-blocking magic tool around us. Just seeing the blue barrier made Melkor tremble. He wasn't used to some extreme caution. Tell me what's going on, Bonifacius demanded. What would require this much fuss? At last, Sylvester revealed the truth. Rosamund is going to be adopted by the king. She will then be engaged to Prince Sigiswald upon coming of age. Those who had not yet attended the Archduke conference were stunned. Their eyes were like saucers and their mouths slapped open and shut. Sylvester saw their expected confusion and continued in a quiet voice. We've been given a year to prepare for her move to the sovereignty. For safety reasons, we won't announce the adoption until it actually happens. We need the status quo to be maintained while we ready ourselves internally. Sylvester hadn't mentioned anything to do with the Grüterscheid. We had decided to keep it all a secret since we didn't know whether I would obtain it or how it might be treated. Everyone involved with the handover process would only be told that the king was adopting me and that I would move to the sovereignty in a year. Charlotte luckily understood the consequences of my adoption better than anyone. She frantically turned to look at Wilfrid, who was completely frozen in place. His wide eyes seemed to be boring into Sylvester. Yeah, you get what you want, dude, but this isn't exactly what you wanted. To be honest. He says he wants it, but when he finally gets it, he doesn't want it, essentially, is what it is. Because, like Sylvester said, his position as the next Archduke is not guaranteed anymore. What about the temple, Melkor muttered, but he was drowned out by a crazed, booming roar from Bonifacius. Now think about what you're saying, Sylvester. Rosamund adopted by the king? Archduke candidates can't be moved to the sovereignty. Sylvester slowly shook his head. Rosamund is my adopted daughter. Were I to disown her, she'd return to being an archnoble, and there's no law against archnobles moving to the sovereignty. And you accepted that ridiculous demand? It was a royal decree. We managed to negotiate a few conditions, but refusing wasn't an option. Conditions? Bonifacius' eyes wandered the room for a moment before returning to Sylvester, no less harsh than before. I went through them just a moment ago. No, Sylvester asked, clearly having expected such a reaction. 5 years of nobles marrying into Ehrenfest and 40-some magic tools for our duchy's newborns. That's all, Bonifacius thundered, leaping up out of his chair. You sold Rosamund to the sovereignty for that? Unfazed, Sylvester revealed the details he had omitted from the general announcement. Our sovereign nobles will be ordered to return home. Rosamund's adoption will count as the entirety of a burden, and Ferdinand will receive better living conditions and a guarantee that he won't be punished for Detlande's crimes. These were our terms. I'd say I did a much better job as Ob than last year when Ferdinand met with the king behind my back, and agreed to leave without securing Ehrenfest anything of value. Bonifacius' blue eyes shot wide open. You asked them to help Ferdinand? What benefit is there to that? A few improvements for someone who doesn't even belong to Ehrenfest anymore does nothing to make up for us losing Rosamund. You're supposed to be the Ob, aren't you? Did you really let your love for your brother get the better of you? They weren't my requests, Sylvester replied with a grimace. He then pointed at me and said they were hers. All eyes fell on me. Have you fallen in love with him? Bonifacius asked me, his jaw practically hitting the floor. Did something happen in the temple? Please do not get carried away. Is it really that strange to be worried about someone who is like family to you? A wave of sadness washed over me. After I moved to the sovereignty, will you forget about me the very next day? Will you stop calling me your granddaughter and maintain that you have nothing to do with me? Of course not. Even if your adoption to Sylvester is undone, you will always remain my granddaughter. Would you call your love for me romantic then? It's the same point there. Hello? Your family. It's the same point. I smiled. I worry for Ferdinand in the same way that you will worry for me when it comes time for me to move. My initial demand was for him to be returned to Ehrenfest, but the royal family refused. I made sure to add that if we had managed to get him back, it would have solved most of our problems, but the man assured us to the lives thanks to the handover of the temple work and the printing industry. Bonifacius slumped his shoulders. I realize now that I jumped to a bizarre conclusion, but are you not opposed to moving to the sovereignty? I am. It will require me to abandon my dear library and printing workshop and go somewhere far, far away from new books. Worse still, my future family is reluctant to prepare even a book room for me in my own home. I am nothing but... Dude, stop that! Nothing but unsatisfied, and that dissatisfaction was unlikely to go away anytime soon. I wanted to build a printing workshop in the sovereignty as soon as possible, and improve the teleportation circles between Ehrenfest and the sovereignty so that new books could be sent to me immediately. However, Ferdinand went to Ahrensbach without defying the royal decree. I continued. Thus, I must also obey. The most I could do was use my adoption to support Ehrenfest, but I do believe I was of some use. Bonifacius went to say something, but Sylvester spoke first. Your granddaughter is marrying a prince. Shouldn't you be glad? You never stopped complaining that Wilfrid was no match for her and that she was wasted on him. Ooh! This time Bonifacius grimaced. He turned to look at Wilfrid, who returned a sardonic smile and said, I don't see why this surprises you, Lord Bonifacius. You've said it yourself more times than I can count. Rosamund excels no matter where she goes. She's more suitable to be the next Ob. She can do anything. Wilfried then stared. Oh, we're about to get a bit of a blow up here, I think. If I'm correct. Wilfried then stared at Sylvester. He was clearly battling a storm of emotions. His fists were clenched and trembling atop the table. But unlike Bonifacius, he didn't raise his voice or lose his temper. Instead, he continued in a calm but dry manner. I was the only Archduke candidate who could tie Rosemine to Ehrenfest, was I not? Every time I asked to end our engagement, you told me it was my duty to endure it, and now it's been cancelled. It seemed that he had also considered our engagement to be a loveless duty. Maybe he had wanted to cancel it from the start, but everyone else had gotten in the way? Is this a boon for Wilfried, then? He thinks, but I'm assuming once it's said and done, he's not going to be happy about it, even if it is loveless. Because our engagement was being cancelled as a result of a royal decree, it wouldn't damage his reputation. I sighed, relieved. There was no reason to dwell on it any further, right? Uh-oh. Here we go. So, Father, who will be Ehrenfest's next Ob? Wilfried asked. Sylvester bit his gaze and quietly said, that's a discussion for later. There's no point in us discussing it now. The tension in the room was so thick that one could cut it with a knife. How blind had I been to think that Wilfried would appreciate this royal decree? He was still desperately trying to contain his emotions, and seeing that made my stomach drop. Sylvester continued, the role could go to Charlotte if she takes a groom from another duchy, or to Melkor. It could go to the child whom Florencia is carrying right now. Or, if you work hard enough, it could still go to you, Wilfried. Father, Charlotte interjected, her indigo eyes wide with disbelief as they filtered from him to Wilfried. Is that to say... Florencia smiled and finally broke her silence. Charlotte, you have had to endure the unreasonable for so long. To save Wilfried and secure Rosemine's position, the right to pursue the seat of Ob that rightfully belongs to every Archduke candidate was taken from you. Yet you never made your dissatisfaction known and worked tirelessly to support them both. The amount of work you have put into keeping Ehrenfest together cannot be understated. Charlotte's eyes grew wet with tears, and she rejoiced that her efforts were finally being understood and praised. Woo woo! You get the praise you finally deserve, girl! Meanwhile, I hadn't realized that I hadn't even shown her even a fraction of the gratitude she deserved. She had always been so considerate, consoling, and supporting me when I needed it, but what I had done for her... Not nearly enough. I'm a terrible big sister. You gotta make that up to her, girl. Wilfried was a year older than Charlotte, and men were prioritized for the archducal seat. Maybe because of that, as well as my own disinterest in ruling Ehrenfest, it had never even occurred to me that she might want to become the next Ob. Sylvester arranged the engagement, but did I betray Charlotte by accepting it? If she had grown up working hard to become the next Archduchess, then I must have obstructed and even wounded her by rescuing Wilfried through our engagement and securing his place as the next Ob. I examined my sister carefully. She was too busy staring at Florencia to look back at me. Charlotte, Florencia said, as the royal decree has undone Wilfried and Rosemine's engagement, I will give you a choice. If you wish to become the next Ob, then find what you lack during the next 5 years, while the marriage restrictions are in place, and wed a man worthy of serving as the first husband of the next Ob, Ehrenfest. Rosemine's move to the sovereignty means that the environment here will change drastically. Keep a keen eye on those changes and make whatever choices seem best. Charlotte had 3 options. She could aspire to become the next Ob, she could marry an archnoble and adopt a more supportive role to Ehrenfest, or she could wait 5 years and then marry into another duchy. She smiled and nodded at Florencia, then turned to Sylvester and asked, Father, when will the next Ob be chosen? He shut his eyes. As I said, not right away. We can't even be sure that Rosemine's current adoption will be nullified a year from now. It's extremely likely to happen, but still, until it actually does, we're going to maintain the status quo. Don't tell your retainers and act as though everything is normal. Take care not to let anything slip. Charlotte nodded again. There must have been countless thoughts running through her head. Although she was looking at Sylvester, she was lost in her own little world. To be honest, Sylvester said, I think the decision can wait until either Bonifacius or I pass away. We have to hurry with the engagement and arrange engagement and make it clear who is going to take the archducal seat to contain the lies gangs and forestall their attempts to make Rosemine the next Ob. But we won't need to rush this time around. Bonifacius has been educated to serve as an interim archduke, so even if I die first, the decision can wait. Understood, Charlotte replied, her eyes sparkling. Florencia looked at her daughter as if admiring a dazzling light, then turned to her youngest son. The same goes for you, Melkor. If you wish to be the Ob in the future, then you will need to work hard so that you are worthy of the position. He paused and thought, then shook his head. I will consider this when I come of age. Right now, I need to focus on being the High Bishop. There's so much for me to learn that I'm never not busy, and we only have a year before Rosemine leaves. I can't think about becoming the Ob right now. Florencia looked surprised and smiled. That certainly is true. Going forward, those who wish to become Obs will need to pray often and obtain more divine protections. Carry out your duties and spend the time until your coming of age thinking about your future. Yes, Mother. And Rosemine? He looked at me brimming with resolve to become the next High Bishop. I look forward to your teachings over the next year. I felt a goofy smile appear on my face. He was relying on me? You will do just fine, I said. I cannot bring all of my retainers to the sovereignty, so I intend to leave several of them in the temple. They will come to your aid should you need them. You can also expect help from the blue priests we have trained thus far, such as Camphor and Freetik. Only through the support of others have I managed to perform my duties as the High Bishop. I might be able to lead the paperwork to them, but my hardest job is going to be learning to give blessings like you do, Rosebud. You don't have to do blessings like that. You don't. Melkor puffed out his chest. I know it's the most important duty of a High Bishop, but still. Sylvester smirked ever so slightly and waved dismissively. Rosemine has so much honor that even the royal family asked for her to perform their ceremonies. She's a good goal to work toward, but take care not to drive yourself crazy. It's going to take you a long time to match what she does. You'll get better and better as you learn to compress your mana at the Royal Academy and start getting more to work with. For now, though, Rosemine needs to hand over everything she's been doing, from her duties in the temple to her work with the printing industry, all while preparing for her new life. It won't be easy for her, so help out as much as you can. Right. Melkor and Charlotte were both radiating hope, but Wilfred seemed graver than ever. He had a noble smile plastered over his face, but he was sitting stock still and in complete silence. Charlotte, Melkor, Bonifacius, remember not to say a word about Rosemine's adoption to anyone, Sylvester cautioned. If you leak anything to your retainers, there's no knowing what the Lysgangs might do. And if any of the other duchies find out, the Royal Academy will become a drastically more dangerous place for Rosemine to be. Understood. All right, you may leave. He looked over at Wilfred. There's more that the rest of us need to discuss. Three glanced at Wilfred, their expression betraying their concern, then quietly took their leave. Sylvester, Florencia, Wilfred, and I were the only ones left in the meeting room. You did well to keep your emotions under control, Wilfred, Sylvester said. The frustration that had been eating away at Wilfred finally surfaced. Uh-oh. I think we're about to get the blow-up. I'm the only Archduke candidate raised by grandmother. I'm also a criminal who entered the Ivory Tower, and someone who by all rights should have been punished alongside the rest of the Veronica faction during the Winter Purge. You told me I was by far the least suitable Archduke candidate to become Ob, that I probably wouldn't be able to remain an Archduke candidate, let alone take the Archducal seat if my engagement to Rosemine has cancelled, and yet you were pushing for it. You were pushing for your engagement to be cancelled. Why were you doing that if you were so concerned about it? Well, here we are. What's going to happen to me? I don't know. I said as much before. Father, Wilfred shouted, slamming a fist against the table. Here we go. His sudden outburst surprised me so much that I immediately recoiled. What do you mean you don't know what will happen to Wilfred once our engagement is cancelled, I asked. And what conversation are you both referring to? Everyone was on the same page with me, and it made me feel as though I didn't belong here. The purge cost Wilfred his support base, Sylvester explained, and if your engagement falls through while the Lysgangs are in best dominant power, it wouldn't be strange for everyone to unite and push for him to be sent to the Ivory Tower so that he can never become the next Ob. Everything will depend on how much we can curb the Lysgangs' power over the next year. And as it stands, we don't know what the situation is going to look like when the cancellation is finally announced. Apparently, many of the Lysgangs were adamant that letting the one Archduke candidate whom Veronica had raised, and a criminal who had entered the Ivory Tower at that, become the next Ob would make a mockery of the duchy's leadership. They were openly and persistently demanding that he be removed from his current position and executed. But that doesn't make any sense, I said. Ehrenfest has already lost Ferdinand. Once it loses me as well, it won't have enough mana to support itself. Yet they're calling for an honor student Archduke candidate to be removed. How dumb are they? As far as I see it, the problem is that the Lysgangs refuse to accept the reality of our situation. That's pretty blunt of you, but you're right, Sylvester replied with a sigh. Wilfred glared at me, his eyes sharper than ever. Why are you acting as though this has nothing to do with you? He snapped. It's your job to contain the Lysgangs. You're their princess, aren't you? Instead, you're completely abandoning your duty. Excuse me, I asked, blinking at him. Sylvester quickly intervened. Stop, Wilfred. Rosemine was raised in the temple, so she doesn't think of the Lysgangs as her family. Karstedt, Elvira, and Bonifacius are the ones tasked with controlling them. Brunhilde will eventually take on the duty as well. But Father, Wilfred explained, over the course of Spring Prayer, the Lysgangs told me I was your favorite to become the next Ob, purely because of my sex. They said that Rosemine would doubtless rule Ehrenfest if not for my unfair advantage, that my becoming an Archduke was laughable a farce, yet I possessed not even the good sense to stop down. She is their figurehead. She shares their blood, so she must have something, anything that can control them. Not really. She does not. She doesn't even share their blood. That's the funny part. Are you going to tell them that? That I don't even share their blood? The Lysgangs' insults hadn't ended there, though. They had continually mentioned my 3 consecutive years of coming first in class as evidence that Wilfred was inferior to me, and relentlessly asserted that my bloodline and past were spotless compared to his. He continued, Father, why did you force me down the path to become the next Ob when nobody else wanted it? If everyone hates me with a passion, then what good was it to trying to earn their support? Am I to spend the rest of my life being mocked and abused, with people even refusing to address me properly? Am I always going to be compared to Rosemine, a prodigy, the likes of which the world has never seen before, and told that I could only ever become the Ob by her good graces? Must even my cherished memories of my childhood be blackened with bitterness, shame, and regret? Veronica had done many horrible things to Ferdinand and to the duchy as a whole, but to Wilfrid she had always been his kind grandmother who had raised him from a young age. Even now that she was in the ivory tower, he was nostalgic for the time they had spent together. It probably similar to how I still cared about Ferdinand. Even now that he had moved to Arensbach, no matter how much people told me not to worry or think about him, I couldn't stop myself. Rosamund, I don't want to live as your husband when you clearly care about Uncle more and prefer to spend your time helping him over me. I'd rather die than spend a lifetime with everyone comparing me to you, and you comparing me to him. Who says you compare... Whatever. Every time I'm told to make an engagement face stone for you or to send you some gifts, I just think about how you'll compare whatever I give you to what you already have from Uncle, so I can't stomach that. Who said that she would do that? I gazed down at all my charms from Ferdinand. Apparently they hurt Wilfrid's pride as a man. Well, they're protective charms. I can't just take them off. Wilfrid continued, once I'd come to terms with the fact that I didn't want to marry a girl who only cared about someone else, I concluded that it was best for you to become the Ob since you already had the support of the Lions King, so I went to Father and requested as much. I turned to Sylvester. I wasn't told about this. For obvious reasons, he replied. Had you found out that Wilfrid wanted to cancel your engagement, you would have tried to cancel it as well, right? But you wouldn't have wanted to become the next Ob, which would have made it easy for the royal family or a top-ranking duchy to poach you. It would have brought chaos to Ehrenfest and absolutely zero benefit, so why would we have told you? In fact, your retainers were all doing their best to keep you and Wilfrid apart so that you wouldn't work together to end your engagement. Everything clicked. In retrospect, our retainers had actively worked to keep us away from one another. And that was when I started sending those ordinances of concern. Wilfrid must have been truly miserable having to listen to those forced messages day in, day out, when he was only keeping up the engagement because he felt duty-bound to. Now I was starting to wonder why Sylvester had told me to show more concern for Wilfrid in the first place. Considering everything that had been going on behind the scenes, it had been guaranteed to backfire. The only thing Father had to do was order you to become the next Ob, Wilfrid ranted, but he refused no matter what I said to him. He just kept repeating that he couldn't allow you to rule Ehrenfest, that I needed to take the Archducal seat over and over again. He also said that he couldn't nullify our engagement because it was the only thing keeping you in Ehrenfest. In his words, it was the future I'd chosen, so I needed to take responsibility for it. Sylvester, Ferdinand, and Karsten had no intention of letting me, a former commoner, become the duchy's next Ob. Wilfrid didn't know this, though, and Sylvester wasn't able to tell him, so communication between them had quickly broken down. Sylvester shook his head, looking exhausted. Wilfrid, if you had refused to marry Rosamund when I first proposed it, or told me your true feelings before Ferdinand was required to leave Ehrenfest, I wouldn't have hesitated to cancel the engagement, but you changed your tune at the worst possible moment. If we had ended our engagement back when Wilfrid complained to Sylvester, then the royal family or a top-ranking duchy would almost certainly have claimed me, and with the Lions King strengthened by the Purge, Wilfrid would have been in grave danger. Sylvester had no intention of sending his own son to the Ivory Tower, especially when that son had worked so hard to avoid distant inheritance, and even managed to become an honor student at the Royal Academy. I didn't want Wilfrid to be punished or treated like harshly either. Father, Wilfrid cried, his voice betraying such deep anguish that my heart began to ache. You told me that as Ob Ehrenfest you were unable to let Rosamund go. You said it was my duty to accept the engagement. You made me swallow my true feelings and suffer the consequences, so why is Rosamund being adopted by the king all of a sudden? And why do we need to spend the next year pretending that our engagement hasn't already fallen apart? I don't know how I can be expected to put on a brave face when Rosamund is becoming a royal and abandoning Ehrenfest, while I'm destined to lose the security of my current position and clash with the Lies gangs. He fell silent for a moment, then gritted his teeth and slammed a fist against the table again. Don't play dumb with me! If you hadn't agreed to it, Rosamund wouldn't be a year away from entering the royal family. If you had made her the next Ob, you could have turned them down. But with the Gruterscheid at stake, I doubted that making me Ehrenfest next ruler would have changed anything. Oh boy. Really? Are you going to upset your mother on this one? Wilfrid continued, if she had become the next Ob and our engagement had been cancelled, I would have been free. The Lions Gangs would have had their wish granted, and they wouldn't have cared whether I lived or died. If she's leaving to join the royal family, Ehrenfest will descend into chaos. What am I supposed to do? It was terrifying to see your entire future go dark, to not know where you stood or whether you could even survive. I understood that all too well. Wilfrid looked his son head on. You can live as you please, Wilfrid. What? If you aren't set on becoming the next Ob anymore, then it won't be your job to keep the Lions Kings under control. Brunhilde and I will take them on instead, as will whoever else strives to rule Ehrenfest. As long as you don't forget your duties as an Archducal family member, you won't need to balance anything else. You can leave your current burdens to others. Wilfrid said nothing. He was like a deer caught in the headlights. In a year's time, you will be free, Sylvester went on. You can support Ehrenfest as an Archduke candidate, as Bonifacius does, or you could wait for 5 years and marry into another duchy. You could become a Gieb. Our duchy is in dire need of them. Or you could introduce a new industry as Rosamund did. You could even take your pick of classes from the Knights course and strive to become the Knight Commander as Bonifacius and Ferdinand did. Of course, you could also continue to work toward becoming the next Abbot, this time in a race that wouldn't see you constantly compared to Rosemine. Just as Florencia had suggested pass for Charlotte, Sylvester was trying to give Wilfrid as many options as he could think of. Wilfrid, what do you want to become, I asked. What do I want? The status quo won't change for another year. Perhaps you could spend this time deciding what kind of life you want to live? Preparing for the future will require some work no matter which path you take. Why not use this time productively? Wilfrid eyed me skeptically. I already know one thing. I can't bear being engaged to you. That's not nice. That is not nice at all. The feeling is mutual. Just as you can't see me as your wife, I can't see you as my husband. I'm still not sure how one is even supposed to interact with one's partner-to-be. People were always telling me to do a better job, but to be honest, trying to keep up with the act was painful. It hadn't been pleasant knowing that everyone expected such grand tales of romance from what had been little more than a political engagement, nor had it been nice being constantly told to act more like a fiancé when I didn't know how to. Before this next year, I held in my hand, I think we can act as siblings again. We might not have made a good couple, but we had gotten along well as brother and sister. Wilfrid stared at my hand deep in thought, then smiled softly and took it. Yeah, being engaged to you was painful, but I still love you as a sister. I'll use this time to think about my future. Dear God, thank you. They both hated that. Wow. Okay, yeah, Wilfrid has some options. He doesn't have to be the next Abbot if he doesn't want to. Charlotte could do it. Melkor could do it if he wants to, in 5 years' time. Or they could raise the child that Florencia is carrying as the next Abbot. We don't know. Okay, my retainer's choices. After his brief explosion, during which he'd said a lot that I wanted to protest, Wilfrid agreed to maintain the status quo for the next year. That was a huge relief, and it meant he didn't have anything to do with me anymore. No matter what path he chose moving forward, Sylvester and Florencia would doubtless protect him. If you will excuse me, I must return to my chambers, I said. My retainers will need to consider their next moves. Go ahead, Sylvester replied. You'll need permission from the parents of any retainers who aren't name sworn to you. As for the others, work under the assumption that they won't be going with you, even if only to prevent crucial intelligence from leaking over the next year. If they really want to serve you, they can enter the sovereignty after coming of age. I nodded, took a step toward the door, then stopped. There was something else I needed to ask. By the way, would it be acceptable for me to write to Ferdinand, or is that restriction still in place? I think you're good? You're not engaged to Wilfrid anymore. Yeah. Surely I was fine to resume our correspondence now that I was no longer needed to act like the perfect fiancé. I mean, she has to tell him what's going on. Good God, dude. Sylvester looked exasperated. After everything that had just happened, I was still thinking about Ferdinand. He gave me permission, though, on the condition that I show him the letter first. You sure do love Uncle, huh? Wilfrid sighed, then accompanied me to the door. My feelings for him are the same as yours for your grandmother, I said. She is someone you value and worry about. Is she not? My mentor, a man who has looked after me since before my baptism, was sent by royal decree to a place out of my reach. To make matters worse, the next time I saw him, he had consumed more rejuvenation potions than any other man should. A testament to the grueling environment in which he is being made to work. How could I not worry about him? You must remember the cloying smell of rejuvenation potions when he stayed in the tea party room. Wilfrid started to frown. He always smells like potions. How can you tell whether that's from brewing or using them? That you even need to ask speaks volumes. Have you not been brewing enough? If you cannot even distinguish between those two smells, then how will you be able to brew what you need when you need it? Wilfrid would surely be in trouble if he couldn't brew his own charms or rejuvenation potions. The crease in his brow deepened. I say this as your brother, but your common sense makes no sense at all. No normal member of an archducal family brews things themselves. Are you sure? Ferdinand always brewed his own potions and charms. That's because he enjoys brewing. He's the same when it comes to research. That doesn't make it any less strange to the rest of us. I could already feel my understanding of noble society starting to crumble once again. But I was told that I need to at least be able to make my own potions. Is that not the norm? It doesn't hurt to be able to make them. It might even be a good skill to have in case of an emergency, but that job would normally fall to your scholars. I already knew where my misunderstandings had come from. Before his move to Arensbach, Ferdinand had often holed up in his temple workshop to brew one thing out or another. To make matters worse, Justice had never gone inside with him, nor had the attendant Scotch scholar ever carried around a daily supply of potions. Not to my knowledge, at least. Could anyone blame me for assuming that nobles were supposed to make their own regularly used potions? Ferdinand was holding me to a weird standard after all. My time on Earth and in the lower city had done enough to make my common sense seem unusual in the eyes of the country's nobles. That was why I had started taking after Ferdinand, but now I was being told that he was unusual too. Great! You've been following the wrong noble to act as a role model here. When it comes to, how a noble should be, To be honest, I've suspected as much for a very long time. I'm not sure anyone has ever said to me outright, though. Why do you think we take scholars as retainers in the first place, Wilfried asked. Well, mine tend to be busy during administrative work in the temple, transcribing books, collecting stories of the Royal Academy, and writing stories of their own. In any case, it makes more sense for me to brew my own charms and potions. Ferdinand's recipes need to be kept secret, and they all require a lot of mana. I couldn't ask Felina Roderick to make my rejuvenation potions for me. They had neither the mana nor the skill necessary to brew them. Hartman was a more realistic option, but I wanted him to focus on temple work. You should give your scholars more brewing work to do, Wilfried sagely noted. At this rate, people are sure to criticize whatever grades they end up with, and brewing class is too low for Archduke retainers. I assumed that was simply inevitable for lay nobles and med nobles, but I see now that I should reconsider. I never hesitated to give Felina Roderick paperwork to complete. There was no denying their talent for it, but because of their mana, I never even thought to entrust them with brewing. Instead of as a scholar myself, I'd opted to take care of my own brews, but maybe a change of perspective was necessary? Lady Rosemond, Cornelius called. He had just rushed over, no doubt concerned that I was leaving so much later than Charlotte and the others. Seeing the worry on his face made me a little embarrassed, but that worry turned to caution the moment he set eyes on Wilfried. We must return to my chambers, I said. Could you summon all of my retainers? There is something important I need to tell everyone. Summon both Brunhilde and Adelie as well. Understood. I returned to my chambers to find that my retainers had all gathered. I am only making this announcement because every single one of you will need to consider your future afterward, I said. It is confidential to the highest degree. Do not share what I'm about to tell you to anyone. They responded in unison, yes, my lady. I went on to tell everyone that during next year's Archduke conference, my current adoption will most likely be undone so that the king will take me as his adopted daughter instead. This could change according to the royal family's whims, I said, but understand that I am extremely likely to be moved to the sovereignty. As expected, everyone stared at me in shock. Well, almost everyone. Hartman alone remained impassive as though he had predicted this development already. What of Lord Wilfried, he asked. Our engagement will be cancelled at the same time as the adoption. Until then, we intend to maintain the status quo. And he agreed to this, Hartman murmured. Now he looked surprised. He must not have anticipated that Wilfried would play along. Next, I turned to Brunhilde. Because she had already chosen to become the Ob's second wife, she wouldn't be able to accompany me under any circumstances. Brunhilde, I regret that this occurred after you resolved to marry Ob Ehrenfest. In order to support me, however, once I am gone, I would ask you to protect the lower city craftsmen and all of my trends, while at the same time introducing your own trends to further Ehrenfest's growth. Brunhilde had once believed that these matters could simply be dumped on the commoners, but she had since realized that not all orders were able to be followed. Now she attended meetings with the commoners' merchants and did everything in her power to ensure that all parties were on the same page. It would be reassuring to know that she planned to stay in Ehrenfest as a member of the archducal family. Becoming the Ob's second wife was my decision, and not a single part of me regrets it, Brunhilde said. Brunhilde said plainly, I shall devote my all to Ehrenfest, but if you would allow me to ask, what will this mean for Brunhilde? She will spend the coming winter serving formally as my apprentice attendant. Doing so will allow her to receive the same treatment as the other retainers I am leaving behind, and also prepare her to serve you next spring. Please guide her as your elder sister. Although, if she chooses not to serve as a retainer, we will not be able to share this intelligence with her. Explaining the circumstances will prove troublesome. Understood. Brunhilde often came and went for her education, but she wasn't formally my retainer. That was why she hadn't been summoned along with the others, and why we had to keep her out of the loop. Brunhilde would need to take care of the rest. That concluded my discussion with Brunhilde, who would definitely be staying behind. I turned to my other retainers, who were looking very concerned. Given the times, I cannot leave my underage retainers who are name sworn to me here in Ehrenfest. I already have the royal family's permission to bring them with me to the sovereignty. My other underage retainers, on the other hand, will need permission at return. Thus, I must ask you to stay behind, at least until you come of age, at which point you may move to the sovereignty if you wish. I continued, looking at each of my names sworn in turn. Roderick, Matthias, Lorenz, Grisha. The four of you will come with me to the sovereignty. Muriela is an exception, as she made it clear from the beginning that she wished to give her name to Elvira. From the moment I accepted your names, my intention has been to look after you for the rest of your lives. You entrusted yourselves to me, and I will not cast you aside. Matthias' expression softened. We are honored. I offered my name to you because I wished to follow you for the rest of my days. I am glad it was not merely returned to me. Being able to escape my parents is enough to get me on board with this move to the sovereignty, Roderick said, evidently relieved. Grisha nodded along with him. They both had a complicated relationship with their families. Lorenz, however, frowned. I can't help but worry about my little brother in the orphanage, but as I've given you my name, I will obey your orders. Indeed, there is no way for us to bring Bertram with us, I said. Leaving him before his baptism will prevent him from being adopted. And even if we waited until after, he would still be too young to attend the Royal Academy and become a retainer. The sovereignty was far more dangerous than Ehrenfest, so I couldn't bring a newly baptized child there without a guardian. Rest assured, though, Melkor will serve as the High Bishop after my departure. I intend to leave my temple attendants here, so your brother's treatment in the orphanage will not suddenly worsen. I thank you for your consideration, Lorenz replied, kneeling before me with his arms crossed. Roderick raised a hand, but having sensed that his fellow retainer's concern was now dealt with. How will moving to the sovereignty affect our lives in the Royal Academy? Feline must have been interested as well. I saw her suddenly lean closer to me. You are aware that the children of sovereign nobles attended the academy as students of their home duchies, correct? I asked. My underage retainers who accompany me to the sovereignty will stay in the Ehrenfest dormitory during academic terms. I will appreciate your best efforts to gather intelligence for me during that time. Roderick and Grisha nodded. Feline was watching them, a contemplative hand resting on her cheek. All of a sudden, Hartman approached me. Lady Rosamund, he said, I beseech you, please accept my name. Hartman, I thought you promised not to offer me your name unless I explicitly requested it. My mind and the circumstances have changed. Your move to the sovereignty is sure to be a crucial event. If you would call upon your name sworn first and foremost, then I wish to join them. That was it. He was offering me his name purely because he hadn't been in the very first group of people I'd asked to come with me? Hartman, I said, desperate to stop him. I only listened to them first because they have no choice in this matter, whereas you do. It had nothing to do with importance. Perhaps we could say that I saw no reason to include you because I already trust you unconditionally, or, something to do with unwavering faith? I stumbled over my words a little. In truth, I'd automatically assumed that he would follow me, but that seemed too presumptuous to say out loud. Hartman gave a breezy smile. That you trust me unconditionally means nothing in this situation. Ehrenfest will struggle in your absence, and you have already made it clear that you do not wish to bring many retainers with you. One would assume that because you trust me, you would want me to stay behind to protect your library, the temple, and the merchants. I can't deny that I would take comfort in knowing that you were here, I mused. However, I'd wanted to say that I couldn't even imagine him willingly stay behind, but before I could even get the words out, Hartman knelt before me and took my hand. I wish to serve you at any time under any circumstances without anyone finding it the least bit unusual, he announced. To that end, I implore you to take my name. I swear that it will benefit you. Hartman, your fiancée is right there, I cried, pulling my hand away before frowning frantically at the woman in question. Say that sort of thing to her, not me. Clarissa rushed over at once, but not to take my side. She dropped to her knees beside Hartman, batted her sparkling blue eyes at me, and exclaimed, Mine too! If you take Hartman's name, I want you to take mine as well, Lady Rosamund. Oh, what was that reaction? Oh, of course they would ask that. Of course. Hartman's not going to want to leave. No, not going to stay knowing that he's going to miss out on something crazy happening. Clarissa, I said, you shouldn't be so quick to give away your name. You're soon to be married, aren't you? Shouldn't you and Hartman not give your names to each other as proof of your everlasting love? It clearly wasn't normal to give your name to someone else right in front of your future spouse, but neither Hartman nor Clarissa seemed to understand that. They looked at one another still on their knees and cocked their heads. You want me to give my name to Hartman? Clarissa asked. That would be unthinkable. I agree from the very bottom of my heart, Hartman concurred. It would make no sense for me to give my name to Clarissa. In my opinion, we would create a much stronger bond if we both gave our names to you. My, what a wonderful idea. It truly would create the strongest and most passionate of all bonds. How? And what's so wonderful about it? This has been obvious for a while, but something is seriously wrong with these two. Yeah, they're nuts. They're obsessed. Or maybe my warped common sense was the problem, so as it had been earlier with Wolfried. Hartman and Clarissa were in such vehement agreement that I was starting to doubt myself. Oddly, does their argument seem reasonable from a noble perspective, I mean? Can someone form a stronger bond with his spouse by offering his name to another while in her presence than convincing her to join him? I was desperately hoping she could stop her son and his fiancée. She gave me a brief smile, then shook her head. Fear not, Lady Rosamund. Your hunch was correct. This is not normal in the slightest. However, it would appear that Clarissa is experiencing something of an emotional turmoil. She served you only for a short while during the Archduke conference, and now she fears being left behind. My sincerest apologies, but I must ask you to take them both to the sovereignty with you, whether you decide to accept their names or not. Arlie was looking at the overzealous couple kneeling in front of me as though she had nothing to do with them. I'd already assumed that they would follow me to the sovereignty no matter what I did, and seeing them now made me sure that it hadn't been just my imagination. I cannot go with you to the sovereignty because of my husband, Arlie continued. But these two would follow you wherever you go. Taking their names might be wise in case they allow their enthusiasm to get the better of them. Trying to control them both would otherwise be an insurmountable task. Was that really the response most nobles would give? I was seriously beginning to worry that I didn't have a single normal person close to me. Cornelius is normal. Lenora is noble. All of them are normal except for these two. At least normal in comparison. Oddly, should you really be saying that as Hartman's mother, I asked? Giving me his name would also mean putting his life in my hands, no? I am absolutely certain that their behavior would not change whether they were sworn to you or not. Thus, your convenience takes priority. They are both adults, so they are more than old enough to face the consequences of their actions. Should you need anyone to observe their name swearing, I am at your service. Wait, she's dumping them on me? Has she given up and decided to stop thinking about them entirely? I'd assumed that Audley would be able to keep Hartman and Clarissa on a tight leash, but I saw now that I was gravely mistaken. I reluctantly cast my eyes down to see Hartman staring up at me, his orange eyes sparkling with joy. I want to refuse him again, but that's really hard to do when he's looking at me like this. Mother has given her permission, so please do accept my name, Hartman said. I already have the necessary material, so I can have everything ready by tomorrow. He's shoving his name down my throat. Is refusing him not even an option anymore? Not really. I returned to my other retainers, searching for someone who could come to my rescue, but every single one of them was averting their gaze. They were going to great lengths not to look at Hartman and Clarissa either. Cornelius, Daniel, I asked, urging them to help me. They exchanged troubled glances, and Cornelius sighed. As you are not in danger, I cannot speak on a more private matter such as name swearing. If you cannot bear to take Hartman's name, then you need only flatly refuse him. If you are unsure, I would suggest accepting it. This would minimize the collateral damage. Rather than coming to my rescue, Daniel also advised me to accept Hartman's name. Just as Cornelius suggested, it would come as a tremendous relief to all of your retainers if you were to accept. Has there been collateral damage in the past? I asked, cautious. Daniel remained silent, so Cornelius answered in his stead, it's nothing. Hartman can be harsh when venting his envy toward your name-sworn retainers, that's all. When doing what? Cornelius, you need not sully Lady Rosamond's ears with such details, Hartman said, smiling. Cornelius smiled in response, I only speak the truth. And you would do well to remember that. I am encouraging Lady Rosamond to accept your name. Their back and forth made them seem very close indeed, and as nobody had even tried to refute Cornelius, he must have been telling the truth. Very well, Hartman. I shall accept your name, I eventually relented. That's enough, right? That's what you want. Give it to me so this madness can end. So when shall we do this, Hartman asked. The sooner the better, of course. As expected, Clarissa was going to back down, either. Lady Rosamond, she cried. Mine too, please, mine too. What a relief, Matthias sighed. He should start to calm down now, right? Lorenz asked. I hope so. For some reason, Hartman wasn't the only one who rejoiced when I conceded. Everyone else was glad as well. Is it really okay to perform a name swearing this lightly? I don't think so, but I'm not the one in the wrong here, right? Just as I was beginning to lose confidence, Feline approached me and said, Lady Rosamond, please take my name as well. I swore to offer stories to you and managed to receive Messinora's divine protection. It was then that I resolved to serve you and you alone. Furthermore, staying in Arenfest would only see me sent back home. If the only way for me to accompany you is to give my name, then I shall do so without hesitation. Please, take me with you to the sovereignty. Feline's grass-green eyes were brimming with resolve. I'd seen this expression from her several times before. I already knew that she was determined to forge her own path, but I couldn't accept her name right away. What about Conrad, I asked. Lorenz has already given his name, but you still have a choice. Her expression stiffened, and then she pursed her lips and said, I intend to purchase him. He has yet to be baptized, so I can sell my mother's heirloom and use the money from that. I understand your desire not to leave him behind, but what do you intend to do once he has moved to the sovereignty? My underage retainers were each allowed to bring an apprentice attendant with them, but Conrad was a boy. He wouldn't be allowed to stay in Feline's room. He's also too young to work in the sovereignty as a servant in the orphanage. He was fed and given hand-me-down clothes, but what about after the move? Feline would need to cover those costs herself when she was already struggling to prepare the face stones and learning materials she required for the Royal Academy. Feline looked at me with pleading eyes, but Ferdinand had already scolded me several times for getting too involved with my retainers. I couldn't show any more favoritism, nor could I refuse to look after her brother myself. Above all else, though, I couldn't imagine Conrad having much more of a future living in the sovereignty as a commoner orphan. I understood, Feline replied, her shoulders slumping as she took a step back. Lady Rosamond, I must also request some time to think, Cornelius interjected. Assuming that I do join you, my situation will change drastically, depending on whether I go before or after getting married, and there is much I must think about before I can decide whether a wedding this summer is for the best. Cornelius had already been given Eckerd's estate, and the preparations for his marriage were well underway. Lenore smiled and said that she would go along with whatever he decided. It was nice to see the flames of their romance burning as brightly as ever. Oh, right. I'll need to report to Mother and Father. Karsta had been there when I first announced my Ascent candidacy, and we were keeping him abreast of the situation as it developed, since his permission was necessary to cancel my adoption. But there was a chance that Elvira still didn't know. Hopefully I'm allowed to explain things to her. She's going to be taking over the printing industry after all. I would need to consult Sylvester as well, but that was a thought for later. I turned my attention to Daniel, who had at some point stepped away from Lenore and Cornelius, and asked, Daniel, what will you do? Daniel already knew so much about my circumstances, so I really wanted to have him in the sovereignty with me, but Lainable struggled even in Arenfest. I couldn't just force him to come along. He had cultivated strong bonds of trust with the lower city soldiers, so maybe I could ask him to stay behind to protect the city? This is not something I could decide here and now, he replied. I would ask for some time to think. Very well. Judith? She gave me a somewhat dejected smile. I think I will end up staying in Ehrenfest. My father presented me with a marriage proposal the last time I returned to Kernberger, and it seems unlikely he will allow me to move to the sovereignty after coming of age. Plus, I don't have the courage to give my name just to go with you. Those who were still underage required their parents' permission to do just about anything. Even their marriages were out of their control. Judith's situation at home was perfectly normal. Even watching her interact with Theodore showed that what a close-knit family they were, that she couldn't abandon them on the spur of the moment, and she would be able to carry on just fine without entrusting her name to someone else, unlike Matthias and the others who didn't have a choice. You seem to feel guilty about not accompanying me, I said, but there is really no need. Most underage nobles would stay behind in a situation like this. Rarely would their parents even allow them to move. And your reluctance to give your name is completely normal. Harbin and Clarissa are the weird ones, not us. Judith looked at the unusual couple, then nodded in agreement. I continued, Brunhilde and Ottilie are staying behind as well. I don't consider it a betrayal in the least. In fact, Judith, I would ask that you remain in Ehrenfest and offer Brunhilde your assistance. Yes, my lady, she exclaimed. Just seeing her bright, beaming smile made me sigh in relief. Laisletta placed a hand on Judith's shoulder, her own lips curling upward. May we work hard together. I am both the successor to my house and already engaged to Lord Thorsten, so it would not be an easy task for me to leave Ehrenfest. After Lady Rosamund's departure, I shall become Brunhilde's retainer and oversee the sending of our duchy's books to the sovereignty. Now that Laisletta had made her intentions clear, only one of my retainers had yet to speak, Angelica. And everyone's eyes naturally turned to her. Angelica, what do you intend to do? I asked. She cocked her head at me. What do you think I should do, Lady Rosamund? You're supposed to make up your own mind. The choice is going to decide your entire future, you know. As I agonized over Angelica's stalwart refusal to think for herself, Laisletta giggled. Sister, I believe you should go to the sovereignty with Lady Rosamund. Our parents would prefer that to you marrying Lord Bonifacius, and the sovereign knights are sure to be much stronger than Ehrenfest. I'm going, Angelica declared without another moment's hesitation. I really wish she would take a bit more, any time to think about this. Karstead and Navarra had considered it necessary to hold an entire family conference to decide her marriage partner, and they had agreed that she would marry either Troglodyte or Bonifacius. How was this decision going to affect that? But Angelica, your marriage, I said. I don't care if I never take a husband, she replied coolly, and I think you're the only one I would ever be able to serve. That may be true, but did you really need to put on such a dashing expression? You're acting like you just said something really cool. As I debated whether it was even acceptable to take Angelica's answer at face value, Cornelius offered me a helping hand. Angelica's engagement concerns both grandfather and our parents, so it will be best to consult them before making any decisions. We'll need to have a discussion at home about our adoption being nullified, right? We can bring this up then as well. You're right, I said. We must consult our parents about this. Cornelius, could you speak with father, or perhaps request a meeting with the Abb, so that I can confirm whether I'm allowed to tell mother about my adoption? Sending a letter was too risky. There was always a chance that one scholar or another might end up reading it. Communicating through Cornelius was a much better option, since he could suggest a private conversation with not just Karstead but Sylvester as well. If you obtain permission, I continued, then arrange a time for us to speak with father and mother. Ask if we can discuss Angelica's move to the sovereignty during the same meeting. Leave that to me and get some rest. Now that we've said our piece, we can return to our everyday duties, right? I merely blinked, not having expected that at all. Cornelius went on, your discussion with the Archducal family really drained you, didn't it? Daniel, he gestured to the man in question, was worried when we saw you come out. He said you looked sickly. He did? Get some rest, Cornelius repeated, then took his leave. Did everyone really think I was sick? None of my attendants had said anything. I couldn't help but feel strange as I went over to Daniel, who was waiting by the door, and asked, Daniel, do I truly look unwell? I was, more to do with your demeanor than your appearance, he floundered, clearly struggling to choose his next words. Then leaned forward and whispered, you look as emotional as when you were first trailing behind Lord Ferdinand in the temple, but if I spoke out of turn, I apologize. I didn't think you would notice. After seeing the love and consideration that Sylvester and Florencia had shown Wilfrid, I'd really longed to have someone to lean on, someone I could actually be vulnerable with. In hindsight, I'd probably felt as alone as when I'd spent my first winter in the temple. I'm going to write a letter to Ferdinand in my hidden room, I said. That can wait until tomorrow, Laisletta insisted. You really do not look well. Or would you rather have Lord Ferdinand scold you? She took the message containing Shoemill, which I'd taken to calling Mr. Lecture. She called the Shoemill Mr. Lecture, because he is. From where it was sitting by the fireplace and promptly activated it. Listen to your retainers, it chided me. Wow, pre-recorded or not, hearing Ferdinand admonish me eased some of the tension I was feeling. I went to listen to more, but Laisletta took the Shoemill away and said, let us prepare for bed, Lady Rosamund. He can scold you again after. She got me ready in the blink of an eye, then tucked me into bed with Mr. Lecture. She's gonna take you to sleep like a stuffed animal. Oh my god! Actually, it could be her security blanket, quote unquote. She really seemed to care about the shoe mill, at least based on how carefully she slotted it under my arm. Then after adjusting its positioning a few times, she gave several satisfied nods and went on her way. As I snuggled up to Mr. Lecture, I played one admonitory message after another until sleep finally took hold of me. It was nice, but it also made me crave a very good or two in my library's hidden room. Oh, you won't be able to listen to that anymore in there! Oh, no! Once you move to the sovereignty, you won't be able to do that, and they'll self-delete! No! Oh, shoot! Oh, no! Ferdinand's gonna have to make some more of those. Oh, boy. Okay, I'm gonna have to end this off. I'll edit it some, and I'll see you guys in the next one.